Major Kara Jensen had become invisible. Not literally, of course, but in every way that mattered on Maxwell Air Force Base. She walked through the corridors each morning, her flight suit pristine but purposeless, and watched younger pilots rush past her toward the flight line. Their eyes would flick toward her name tag, recognition would dawn, and then they'd look away. Always away. She was 34 years old, and her career had died 3 years ago in the skies over a place she couldn't forget. The simulator room was her prison now. Rows of training cockpits where rookie pilots learned the basics of close air support, guided by instructors who'd never see real combat. Kara had seen plenty. Too much, maybe. She'd been Reaper 3, call sign for the lead pilot of Reaper Squadron, the unit that specialized in saving Marines when everything went sideways. They'd been the best, the ones who flew into hell and brought people home. Past tense. All past tense now. Major Jensen, the trainees are waiting, Lieutenant Marcus Webb said from the doorway. He was polite, always polite, but there was pity in his voice that made her stomach turn. She nodded and followed him into the training bay, where 4 fresh-faced pilots sat waiting to learn strafing techniques from someone who wasn't allowed to strafe anything anymore. The mission brief was routine. Simulated ground targets, coordination with simulated ground forces, all the mechanics of close air support without any of the actual danger or meaning. Kara walked them through it mechanically, her words coming from muscle memory rather than passion. One of the rookies, a kid named Danny Rodriguez, who couldn't have been more than 23, raised his hand. "Major, is it true you flew in Operation Desert Storm?" Wrong war, wrong era, but she didn't correct him. Let them think she was ancient history. "Focus on your approach angle, Rodriguez. You're coming in too steep." He flushed and returned to his simulator. They didn't ask about the real mission, the one that had ended everything. Nobody asked about that. They all knew, or thought they knew, and their silence was louder than questions. After the session ended, Kara did what she always did. She walked to Hangar 7, the graveyard where the Air Force kept aircraft too damaged or outdated to fly, but not quite ready for the scrap heap. There, in the dim light filtered through dusty windows, sat her old friend, a 10 Thunderbolt II, tail number 1138. Scarred, dented, patched with mismatched panels from a dozen different repairs. The Warthog looked like it had fought every war since Vietnam, which wasn't far from the truth. "Still here, girl," Kara murmured, running her hand along the battered fuselage. The crew chief, a grizzled master sergeant named Tom Braddock, watched from his workbench. He'd been watching her do this for 3 years now, this ritual of visiting a plane that would never fly combat again, just like her. "Kara, you've got to let it go," Braddock said, not unkindly. "That bird's done. So's that chapter of your life. Move on." She checked the control surfaces anyway, testing the ailerons, examining the engine intakes. "She still flies, Tom. All her systems work. She's just waiting. Waiting for what? The Air Force doesn't even want A-10s anymore. They want drones and fancy stealth fighters. Close air support is becoming obsolete." He said it like an apology, which somehow made it worse. Kara pulled herself up onto the wing, peered into the cockpit. The seat where she'd spent hundreds of hours, the stick that had responded to her slightest touch, the targeting system she'd known better than her own apartment. "Maybe," she said quietly, "but obsolete doesn't mean useless. Sometimes the old ways still work." Braddock shook his head and returned to his workbench, leaving her alone with the silent aircraft. Kara sat in the cockpit without powering anything up, her hands resting on the controls, and closed her eyes. In her mind, she was flying again. Not in a simulator, not in her memories of the disaster, but flying free and purposeful, doing the job she'd been born to do. Her pocket vibrated. She pulled out her phone and saw a message from Captain Helen Reeves. One of the few people on base who still talked to her like a human being. Coffee tomorrow? You look like you could use someone to talk to. Kara stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. Sure. 0700 at the commissary. She needed to talk to someone, needed to remember what it felt like to be more than a ghost haunting a hangar. But as she climbed down from the cockpit and headed for the exit, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something that would require more than simulators and sympathy. Captain Helen Reeves was waiting at a corner table when Kara arrived at the commissary the next morning. Helen had flown transports, big lumbering cargo planes, until a crash landing in Afghanistan had shattered her left leg in 14 places. She walked with a permanent limp now, medically retired at 31, working base administration. They bonded over their shared status as the broken and discarded. You look terrible, Helen said by way of greeting, pushing a cup of black coffee across the table. When's the last time you slept? I sleep. Kara took the coffee gratefully. Just not well. Still having the dreams? Helen's voice was gentle, but Kara heard the concern beneath it. She didn't answer directly. Talking about the dreams meant talking about the mission, and talking about the mission meant reliving it. 3 years hadn't dulled any of the edges. The new batch of trainees is promising. Rodriguez might actually make something of himself if he stops overthinking every maneuver. Helen saw through the deflection but let it slide. You're wasted in that simulator room, Kara. Everyone knows it. You should be flying. Everyone knows I'm grounded. You mean? Everyone knows I'm the pilot who survived when her whole squadron didn't. The bitterness surprised even Kara. She'd gotten good at burying it, but apparently not good enough. That's not fair, and you know it. Helen leaned forward. The investigation cleared you. You did everything right. The timing was just 3 minutes. Kara's voice was flat. 3 minutes late. That's the difference between everyone living and 4 people dying while I flew home alone. She stood abruptly. I need to get to the training bay. Thanks for the coffee. She was halfway across the commissary when Helen called after her. Kara, stop punishing yourself. They wouldn't want that. But how do you stop punishing yourself when punishment feels like the only honest response to survival? Kara kept walking. The morning training session was supposed to start at 0800, but when Kara entered the simulator bay, she found Lieutenant Webb and the 4 trainees clustered around a radio, listening intently. The emergency frequency was broadcasting, unencrypted and desperate. She recognized the voice immediately. Colonel Richard Whitman, Operations Commander for the entire sector. Need air support. Any station responding. We have 2 companies of Marines surrounded in grid sector Tango 7 Delta. They are taking heavy fire. Any jets, any air support, respond immediately. The silence that followed was heavy with dread. Then another voice, Operations Control. Negative, Colonel. All combat aircraft are engaged. Falcon Squadron is 30 minutes out, minimum. Rodriguez looked at the others, his young face pale. 30 minutes? Those guys will be dead in 10. Kara's blood turned to ice water. She knew that sector. Tango 7 Delta was the Al Hatter region, a nightmare of broken terrain and ambush positions. Marines caught in the open there wouldn't last 30 minutes. They'd be lucky to last 15. The tactical situation was brutally simple. No air support meant no extraction, and no extraction meant a massacre. Webb noticed her standing frozen by the door. Major? You okay? She wasn't okay. Her mind was calculating ranges, fuel loads, weapon capabilities. The nearest combat-ready aircraft was 30 minutes out, but that wasn't quite true. There was one combat-ready aircraft much closer. Very close. Right here on Maxwell, in fact. Sitting in Hangar 7 with a full weapons load, because Tom Braddock kept everything maintained to perfect specification. Even aircraft that were technically retired How many Marines? Kara heard herself ask. Webb checked the radio readout. 210, Major. 2 full companies. 210 lives. 210 Marines who joined up to serve their country, who had families waiting for them, who were currently surrounded and dying, while the nearest help was half an hour away. Kara's hands started shaking. She shoved them in her pockets and felt the old squadron patch, the scorched fabric she carried everywhere. Never too late, it read, though that had proven to be a lie 3 years ago. But it didn't have to be a lie today. I need to make a call, she said, and walked out before anyone could respond. Her feet carried her toward Hangar 7, her mind running calculations. 220 miles to Tango 7 Delta. The A-10's maximum speed was around 350 miles per hour, closer to 400 if she pushed it and didn't care about fuel efficiency. She could be over the target in approximately 35 to 40 minutes. Not good enough. 30 minutes was the minimum time before those Marines were overrun. She'd still be late, still arrive to find no. She couldn't think like that. Couldn't let the past poison the present. The difference between 35 minutes and 30 minutes was 5 minutes. 5 minutes was 300 seconds. In 300 seconds, skilled close air support could change everything. Could suppress enemy positions, buy time for reinforcements, turn a massacre into a fighting chance. Tom Braddock looked up in surprise when Kara burst into the hangar. Kara, what's wrong? 1138. Is she truly flight ready? Fully armed? His eyes narrowed. Yeah, I keep her mission capable. Why? How fast can we get her ready for immediate takeoff? She's already ready. Braddock stood, understanding dawning on his weathered face. Kara, no, you can't. You're grounded. They'll court-martial you. They'll end your career. Kara was already moving toward the pilot's ready room, pulling her flight suit from her locker. The fabric felt foreign and familiar at once, like putting on skin she'd thought she'd shed forever. My career ended 3 years ago, Tom. At least this way. It'll end meaning something. She pulled on the suit, zipped it up. Found her helmet on the top shelf where she'd left it, gathering dust but intact. 210 Marines are dying right now, she continued, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. No one else can reach them in time. I can. That's all that matters. Braddock stared at her for a long moment. Then he moved to the hangar bay controls and hit the button to open the massive doors. Sunlight flooded in, illuminating the scarred A-10 like a stage spotlight. Then, let's get you airborne, Major. But for the record, this is the craziest thing I've ever been part of. Kara climbed the ladder to the cockpit, settled into the seat that knew her shape. Her hands found the controls without conscious thought, muscle memory taking over. The pre-flight check was automatic, ingrained by thousands of hours. Fuel, full. Weapons, loaded. The Go-8 Avenger cannon, the massive 30mm gun that gave the Warthog its fearsome reputation, showed a full load of 1,100 rounds. She powered up the engines. The twin turbofans spooled up with a deep, powerful roar that she felt in her chest. This was the sound that meant salvation to troops on the ground. The sound that meant death to their enemies. The sound she hadn't heard in 3 years outside of her dreams. Maxwell Tower, this is Reaper 3, requesting immediate takeoff clearance. The tower controller's voice came back confused. Reaper 3? That call sign is inactive. Who is this? This is Major Kara Jensen. Reaper 3, requesting immediate emergency takeoff for a close air support mission in Sector Tango 7 Delta. A long pause. Then, Major Jensen, you are not authorized for combat operations. You are ordered to power down immediately and exit the aircraft. Kara released the brakes and started rolling toward the taxiway. Negative, Tower. 210 Marines don't have time for authorization debates. Reaper 3 is wheels up. You can court-martial me when I get back. Major Jensen, you are ordered to. She switched off the tower frequency and selected the emergency channel. Time to let the Marines know that help, unauthorized and unexpected, was on the way. She pushed the throttles forward, and the A-10 accelerated down the runway, heavy and determined. Not graceful like the sleek fighters, but powerful. Built for one purpose, bringing hell to the enemies of the people who needed protecting. The wheels left the ground. And for the first time in 3 years, Major Kara Jensen was flying combat again. The weight on her chest, the weight she'd carried since the day her squadron died, lifted slightly. Not gone, never gone, but lighter. Hold on, she whispered into the wind. I'm coming. This time, she was going to be on time. The desert scrolled beneath her at 400 miles per hour. Faster than the A-10 was supposed to go, but Kara didn't care about specifications right now. The twin engines screamed their protest but held steady, pushing the aging airframe beyond its comfort zone. She'd coaxed every possible knot of speed from this bird before, knew exactly how far she could push before something critical failed. Today, she'd push right to that edge. The emergency frequency crackled with desperate voices. Marines calling for ammunition, for medical evacuation, for air support that wasn't coming fast enough. Colonel Whitman's voice cut through periodically, trying to coordinate defensive positions, but Kara could hear the strain. He was a good officer, but even good officers couldn't conjure aircraft out of thin air, except one had just conjured herself. Any station, this is Reaper 3, inbound to Sector Tango 7 Delta. ETA 12 minutes. Mark your positions with smoke. Danger close authorization granted. The response was immediate and disbelieving. Reaper 3, say again your call sign. That squadron is inactive. The call sign is active for the next 12 minutes, Colonel. After that, you can file whatever paperwork you want. Right now, I'm your only option. Kara checked her navigation system, cross-referencing with the terrain below. The landscape was familiar in a way that made her chest tighten. She'd flown this route before, 3 years ago, racing toward a different set of coordinates. Racing and failing. Major Jensen? Whitman's voice held recognition now. You're grounded. How are you even? With respect, sir, we can discuss my career suicide later. Right now, brief me on the tactical situation. A pause. Then Whitman made the command decision that would either save his Marines or add his own career to Kara's funeral pyre. 2 companies surrounded, approximately 210 personnel. Enemy force estimated battalion strength with heavy weapons. Multiple casualties already. Falcon Squadron is still 25 minutes out. 25 minutes. Kara would arrive at least 10 minutes before them. 10 minutes where she'd be the only air asset, the only thing standing between those Marines and annihilation. The weight of that responsibility settled on her shoulders like familiar armor. This was what she'd been trained for. This was what she was. The weather was deteriorating. A sandstorm was brewing on the horizon, the kind that could ground aircraft and reduce visibility to nothing. Kara's navigation systems flickered, the old equipment protesting the electromagnetic interference. She switched to manual navigation, using terrain features and her own memory of the region. The rock formations below were like old acquaintances, remembered from missions past. Then she saw it, columns of smoke rising from a depression in the desert floor. The tactical map overlay confirmed it grid Sector Tango 7 Delta. She could see the defensive perimeter, tiny figures clustered behind whatever cover they could find. And the enemy positions closing in like a noose tightening. Kara's combat training took over. Analytical and cold. Assess, prioritize, engage. She keyed the radio. Marines. This is Reaper 3. I have visual on your position. Stay in your defensive perimeter. Help has arrived. One of the Marine officers, his voice raw from shouting over gunfire, responded, "Reaper 3, we're taking fire from multiple positions. Heavy weapons to our north and west. We can't hold much longer. You won't have to. Identify your friendlies with orange smoke now." Orange smoke bloomed from the defensive perimeter, bright against the desert sand. Kara locked the image in her mind, the sacred boundary she would not cross. Everything outside that smoke was a target. Everything inside was precious cargo to be protected at all costs. The targeting computer flickered and died. Of course it did. The system was 20 years old, held together by Tom Braddock's skill and prayer. But Kara didn't need a computer. She trained to deliver ordnance the old way, with eyes and instinct and the kind of skill that came from 1,000 repetitions. She armed the Go-8 Avenger, felt the slight vibration as the massive cannon powered up. 1,100 rounds of 30mm depth, each round capable of punching through armored vehicles. Each one delivering salvation to the Marines below and damnation to their enemies. "Reaper 3, you are cleared hot." Whitman's voice was steady now. Trusting her despite everything, Kara lined up her first gun run visually, trusting her eyes and her experience. The enemy positions were clear muzzle flashes, movement patterns, vehicles. She put the target in her mental crosshairs, adjusted for wind and altitude, and pressed the trigger. The Go-8 roared. It wasn't a sound. It was a physical force. 70 rounds per second, each one the size of a beer bottle, each one traveling faster than sound. The gun run was textbook perfect. Decades of training distilled into 5 seconds of precise violence. The enemy position simply disintegrated, vehicles torn apart, weapons silenced. The Marines' cheers crackled over the radio. "The Hog's here! The Hog's here!" But Kara was already banking hard, lining up the next run. More targets, more threats. She worked methodically, precisely, each gun run calculated to maximum effect. Suppress the heavy weapons first, break up troop concentrations, create chaos in the enemy ranks. The A-10 was built for this, designed to fly low and slow and deliver withering fire, to turn battlefields into graveyards for anyone threatening. American troops thought she was halfway through her third gun run when the missile warning screamed. Surface to air incoming. The radar display showed it tracking, closing fast. Kara's hands moved automatically, deploy flares, hard bank, pull into a climbing turn to bleed the missile's energy. The flares bloomed behind her like artificial stars, burning hot enough to confuse the missile's infrared seeker. For a moment, she thought she'd defeated it. Then the missile adjusted, ignored the flares, kept tracking. Advanced seeker, resistant to countermeasures. The kind of weapon that shouldn't be in this region, supplied by someone with deep pockets and darker intentions. Impact. The A-10 shuddered like a wounded animal. Alarms erupted across the cockpit, fire warning in the left engine. Hydraulic pressure dropping, electrical systems flickering. The left engine was trailing smoke and flame, dying fast. Kara's training overrode her fear. Shut down the damaged engine. Activate fire suppression. Assess remaining capability. "Reaper 3, you're hit. You need to eject." Whitman's voice was urgent. Kara checked her weapons display. Still had ammunition. Still had one functioning engine. Still had Marines who needed her. The math was simple. Negative, Colonel. Still have ammo. Still have a mission. The A-10 was flying sluggish now. The damaged engine creating drag. The loss of hydraulic pressure making the controls heavy. But warthogs were designed to take damage and keep fighting. She'd read reports of A-10s returning to base with one engine gone, with holes big enough to crawl through, with control surfaces shot away. They were tough birds, built for pilots who refused to quit. She lined up another gun run, fighting the damaged aircraft, pouring the last of her ammunition into enemy positions. creating an opening, a corridor the Marines could use to break out, to move to more defensible ground. The gun fell silent, ammunition exhausted. But she'd done it. Suppressed the enemy long enough to matter. Marines, you have a corridor to your east. Move now. Reinforcements inbound. The Marines moved, using the chaos Kara had created, fighting their way to temporary safety. On the edge of the sector, she could see dust trails, reinforcements finally arriving, drawn by the sound of her gun runs. The Falcon Squadron 18 screamed overhead, fast and deadly, arriving to finish what she'd started. Colonel Whitman's voice filled her headset. Thick with emotion, Reaper 3, reinforcements have arrived. Battalion is extracting. You saved them. Now save yourself. Eject. Kara looked at her fuel gauge. Barely enough to make it back to the nearest friendly base. Maybe, if the damaged engine didn't quit entirely. If the hydraulics held. If nothing else failed. Negative, Colonel. This bird's got a few miles left in her. We're coming home. She turned the dying A-10 toward Maxwell Air Force Base, 220 miles away. Every mile would be a victory. Every second a gift. Behind her, 210 Marines were alive, because one grounded pilot had refused to accept that her flying days were over. But the A-10 was dying, and Kara knew it. The question now wasn't whether she'd make it back. The question was whether she'd make it far enough. The desert stretched endless ahead, and the damaged engine coughed once, twice, and then quit entirely. The silence was profound. One engine down, one engine failing, and 200 miles to go. Come on, girl, Kara whispered to the aircraft. Just a little farther. The A-10 kept flying, because that's what warthogs did. They took damage and kept fighting. They refused to quit. Just like their pilots. Flying on one engine was like trying to run a marathon with a broken leg, technically possible, but every second was agony. The A-10 groaned and shuddered, the remaining engine straining under the load it was never designed to carry alone. Kara nursed the throttle, finding the sweet spot between enough power to stay airborne and so much power that the engine tore itself apart. The fuel gauge dropped steadily, faster than it should. The explosion had compromised something in the fuel system, probably the left-wing tank. She was leaving a trail of jet fuel across the desert sky, a breadcrumb path that led directly to her increasingly likely crash site. Mathematics had never been comforting, and right now the math said she'd run out of fuel approximately 40 miles short of Maxwell. 40 miles. Might as well be 40,000. Two F-22s from the carrier group had peeled off from the main formation and taken up escort positions on either side of her crippled aircraft. Their sleek, angular forms made the battle-scarred A-10 look even more prehistoric by comparison. One of the Raptor pilots, call sign Viper 1, came over the radio. Reaper 3, Viper 1. That was one hell of a show back there, ma'am. We counted 4 gun runs on a damaged aircraft. How do you even stay in the air? Kara's voice was tight with concentration. Same way I'm staying in the air now, stubbornness and poor decision-making. Roger that. We've got your 6 all the way home. You're not alone up here. But she was alone in all the ways that mattered. Alone in a dying aircraft. Alone in the choice she'd made to violate direct orders. Alone with the knowledge that in approximately 30 minutes she'd either be court-martialed or posthumously decorated. Possibly both. The emergency frequency came alive with traffic. Word was spreading across the military network. Reaper 3 is inbound. The grounded pilot saved 210 Marines. Every base within range was tracking her position. Watching the slow progress of the damaged A-10 limping home at Maxwell, Tom Braddock was coordinating with the emergency crews, his voice crackling through Kara's headset. Kara, we've got the runway cleared. Crash crews standing by. Medical standing by. The whole base is standing by. Just get this bird on the ground in one piece. Working on it, Tom. Another shudder ran through the airframe. The remaining engine was overheating now, temperature gauges climbing into the red. She reduced power slightly, accepting slower speed in exchange for not having the engine explode. Her airspeed dropped to barely above stall speed. Any slower, and she'd fall out of the sky like a stone. Captain Helen Reeves' voice joined the radio chatter, patched through from base operations. Kara, I'm watching your track on radar. You're going to make it. You have to make it, because I need you to buy me coffee and explain how you went from simulator instructor to action hero in one morning. Despite everything, Kara smiled. Add it to the list of things I need to explain. Right after unauthorized combat mission, and before theft of military aircraft. Borrowed, Helen corrected. You borrowed military aircraft. And only because Marines needed saving. That's different. The hydraulic pressure continued dropping. Soon the control surfaces would lock up entirely, and she'd be flying a 200,000-pound brick. Kara flexed her hands on the stick, feeling the resistance increasing. Every control input required more force, more effort. Her arms were already aching. Viper 2, the other Raptor pilot, suddenly called out. Reaper 3, you're trailing more smoke. Looks like fire in your right engine now. Perfect. Just perfect. The fire suppression system had already been exhausted on the left engine. If the right engine caught fire fully, she'd have no choice but to eject. An ejection over the desert meant leaving the A-10 to crash wherever physics dictated. Probably onto something expensive or populated or both. Acknowledged. Viper 2, monitoring. What else could she say? She was monitoring everything, watching the entire aircraft disintegrate around her in slow motion, willing it to hold together for just a few more miles. The desert gave way to scrubland, then to the outskirts of civilization. She could see roads below, vehicles, signs of human habitation. Maxwell was close now, maybe 20 miles. The fuel gauge read empty, running on fumes and prayers. The engine temperature was so far into the red zone that it wasn't even registering anymore. Maxwell Tower Reaper 3 is inbound. I'm declaring an emergency. One engine out, one engine failing, hydraulics failing, fuel critical. Request straight-in approach, no pattern. Roger, Reaper 3. You're cleared for immediate landing, any runway. Crash crews are ready. Kara could see the base now, the runway stretching out like welcome arms. So close. She'd made it farther than the mathematics said she should, farther than any reasonable person would have bet on. The A-10 had given everything it had. Flown when it should have fallen. Survived when it should have died. Just like 3 years ago. Except this time, everyone was coming home. The landing gear deployed, but the indicators showed it hadn't locked properly. Of course it hadn't. The hydraulics were too far gone to fully extend the gear. She'd be landing on partially deployed gear, which meant she'd be landing on her belly after the gear collapsed. A controlled crash, they called it, which was military speak for, this is going to hurt. Tom, gear won't lock. I'm coming in hot and heavy. Copy. Just get it on the ground, Kara. We'll handle the rest. The final approach was a controlled emergency, every pilot's nightmare. Too slow and she'd stall and crash short of the runway. Too fast and she'd overshoot or lose control. She split the difference, aiming for barely controlled flight, trading altitude for distance, coaxing the dying aircraft toward the concrete. The runway rose up to meet her. She flared at the last second, pulling back on the stick with all her remaining strength. The A-10 hit hard, bounced, hit again. The landing gear held for exactly 2 seconds before collapsing with a shriek of tearing metal. The aircraft slid forward on its belly, sparks flying, metal screaming against concrete, Kara fighting the controls to keep it straight. The world was noise and violence and the smell of burning metal. Then, gradually, motion ceased. The A-10 slid to a stop halfway down the runway, smoking and broken but down. Kara sat in the cockpit for a long moment, hands shaking on the controls, breathing hard. She'd made it. Against all odds, against all reasonable expectation, she brought the dying aircraft home. Her fingers found the canopy release, and it opened with a hydraulic hiss. Fresh air flooded in, clearing away the smoke and smell of burned electronics. Emergency crews were already surrounding the aircraft. Foam trucks spraying the engines, medics running toward her with equipment. Kara climbed down the ladder on legs that barely held her weight. Tom Braddock was there, his face a mixture of relief and fury. "You're insane," he said, but he was grinning. "Absolutely, completely insane." "Yeah," Kara agreed, looking back at the destroyed A-10. "But they're alive, Tom, all 210 of them." "That's worth a little insanity." The helicopter was landing nearby, rotor wash kicking up dust and debris. Colonel Whitman stepped out, walking directly toward her with purpose. Kara straightened, ready for whatever came next. She'd broken every rule, violated every protocol, and she'd do it again without hesitation. Whitman stopped in front of her. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, the colonel who'd called for help and the pilot who'd answered. Then Whitman saluted, sharp and formal and full of respect. "Major Jensen, you just saved 210 Marines. Against orders, against regulations, against all common sense." He held the salute. "Thank you." Kara returned the salute, her vision blurring slightly. "Just doing my job, sir." "Your job was training pilots. You were grounded." "My job is saving Marines, sir." "Grounding doesn't change that." Whitman almost smiled. "No, I suppose it doesn't." He dropped the salute. "You're going to have a lot of explaining to do. Generals are very interested in talking to you. But for what it's worth, you did the right thing." As the emergency crews finished securing the aircraft and the medics checked her for injuries she didn't have, Kara felt something she hadn't felt in 3 years. Not quite peace. There would never be complete peace, but something close. Purpose, maybe. The knowledge that when it mattered most, when lives hung in the balance, she'd shown up. She'd flown. She'd saved them. The ghost in the hangar had become Reaper 3 again, if only for one morning. And sometimes, one morning is enough to change everything. The debriefing room was sterile and cold, designed to intimidate. Kara sat at the metal table, still in her flight suit that smelled of smoke and hydraulic fluid, and faced 4 generals whose combined service time probably exceeded a century. They did not look happy. Major General Patricia Holbrook, head of Air Combat Command, led the questioning, her expression carved from granite. "Major Jensen, do you understand the severity of what you've done?" Holbrook's voice could have frozen water. "Unauthorized combat mission, theft of military property, direct violation of your grounding order, reckless endangerment of expensive equipment. The list goes on." "Yes, ma'am. I understand." Kara kept her voice steady, hands folded on the table in front of her. "I'm prepared to accept full responsibility and any consequences." Brigadier General Marcus Stone, a former fighter pilot himself, leaned forward. "Why? Why throw away what remains of your career? You had to know this would end badly for you." "Because 210 Marines were dying, sir, and no one else could reach them in time." Kara met his eyes. "I had the training, the aircraft, and the ability. Not using those assets when lives were at stake would have been the real violation. You were grounded for a reason, Major." Holbrook's voice was sharp. "The psychological evaluation after your squadron's loss indicated you were mentally unfit for combat operations. You weren't cleared to fly combat missions. There it was, the real issue. Not the unauthorized flight, not the broken protocols, But the fundamental question, was she mentally stable enough to be trusted with life and death decisions? Kara took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. With respect, ma'am, I wasn't grounded because I was incompetent. I was grounded because I survived when my squadron didn't, and guilt made people uncomfortable. But guilt doesn't equal incompetence. Today proved that. General Thomas Hart, the oldest of the four, spoke for the first time. His voice was surprisingly gentle. Tell us what happened 3 years ago, Major. Your version. We've read the reports, but reports aren't truth. They're just paperwork. So Kara told them about the mission to support ground troops in hostile territory, about the ambush that caught her squadron by surprise, about being the furthest unit out when the call for help came, about pushing her A-10 to maximum speed, about arriving 3 minutes too late, about finding nothing but wreckage and silence where her fellow pilots should have been. I replayed it 1,000 times, she continued, her voice thick with emotion she'd buried for years. Every decision, every second. What if I'd been faster? What if I'd ignored orders and engaged earlier? What if I'd been the one in the lead position instead of flying sweep? But what ifs don't bring people back. They just haunt you. You think you failed them, Hart said softly. I know I failed them, sir. I was 3 minutes late. In combat, 3 minutes is eternity. They called for help, and I couldn't reach them in time. Holbrook's expression softened slightly, but her voice remained firm. The investigation cleared you, Major. The ambush happened too fast. No pilot could have reached them in time from your position. You know this. Knowing something intellectually and accepting it emotionally are different things, ma'am. Kara looked down at her hands. For 3 years, I've carried the weight of their deaths. Every day, I wake up knowing I survived and they didn't. The grounding felt like justice, like the punishment I deserved. So today was what? Stone asked. Redemption? Today was Marines needing help, sir. Nothing more complicated than that. I had the skills and the aircraft. The choice was simple. Fly and possibly save them, or stay grounded and definitely watch them die. I chose to fly. General Hart pulled a folder from his briefcase, opened it deliberately. We've been receiving communications for the past 6 hours. Letters, emails, phone calls. From the Marines you saved, from their families, from their commanding officers. 210 men are alive because of your actions. Their gratitude is overwhelming. He slid several pages across the table. Kara glanced at them, handwritten notes, printed emails, official commendations from Marine commanders. Words like hero, lifesaver, angel in an ugly plane. She felt her throat tighten. We've also reviewed the tactical recordings from today's mission, Stone added, consulting his own notes. 4 precision gun runs on a damaged aircraft with failed targeting systems. Every run textbook perfect. 0 friendly fire incidents despite danger-close operations. You created a tactical opening that allowed the Marines to reposition and survive until reinforcements arrived. Frankly, Major, it was some of the finest close air support flying I've ever witnessed. Holbrook tapped her pen against the table. Protocol demands court-martial, Major Jensen. You violated direct orders, flew a combat mission while grounded, and endangered military property worth millions. Those are not small infractions. Karen nodded. I understand, ma'am. However, Holbrook continued, and something in her tone shifted. 210 Marines are alive. That's not a small accomplishment either. We're in a difficult position. Punish you, and we send a message that saving lives matters less than following rules. Don't punish you, and we send a message that orders are optional. The room fell silent. Kara waited, knowing her fate hung in this moment, in this sterile room with these 4 generals weighing duty against pragmatism, rules against results. Finally, General Hart spoke. Major Jensen, I'm ordering a full review of your original grounding. New investigation, new psychological evaluation, everything. We're going to determine once and for all whether that grounding was justified or whether we made a mistake 3 years ago. In the meantime, Holbrook added, you're restricted to base. No flying, no training duty, no contact with media. We're convening a special board to determine appropriate action. You'll be notified of their findings within 72 hours. Dismissed, Major. Kara stood, saluted, and walked out of the debriefing room on shaky legs. In the hallway outside, Captain Helen Reeves was waiting, along with Tom Braddock and Lieutenant Marcus Webb. They fell into step beside her as she walked. Well? Helen asked quietly. What's the verdict? Under review. Could go either way. Kara's voice was flat, exhausted. 72 hours to decide if I'm a hero or a criminal. You're a hero, Webb said firmly. Everyone knows it. The whole base has been talking about nothing else. You're a legend. Legends don't help when you're facing court-martial. But despite the words, Kara felt something loosening in her chest. She'd done the right thing. Whatever consequences came, she'd done the right thing. Over the next 3 days, Maxwell Air Force Base transformed into something Kara didn't recognize. Reporters camped outside the gates, requesting interviews she wasn't allowed to give. Support poured in from unexpected places, veterans organizations, retired pilots, even civilian groups who'd heard the story. The debate raged across military forums and social media. Was Major Jensen a hero or a rule breaker? The Marines didn't debate. They knew exactly what she was. On the second day, a bus arrived at the base gates, carrying 20 Marines from the unit she'd saved, all requesting permission to see Major Jensen. Security denied them access. She was restricted from visitors, but they didn't leave. They set up an informal camp outside the gates, holding signs that read, "Thank you, Reaper 3, and heroes don't need permission to save lives." By the third day, their numbers had grown to over 50. Marines on leave, Marines who'd driven across states, all coming to show support for the pilot who'd saved their brothers. The media coverage intensified. The story wasn't just military news anymore. It was national news. Inside her quarters, Kara watched the coverage on her laptop, overwhelmed and humbled. She'd expected court-martial, expected to face her consequences alone. She hadn't expected this outpouring of support, this public declaration that what she'd done mattered more than the rules she'd broken. Helen visited when she could, bringing updates and emotional support. "You've become a symbol," she said on the evening of the third day. "People see you as proof that doing the right thing still matters, even when it's against the rules." "I just wanted to save them," Kara said quietly. "I didn't want to become a symbol. Too late for that. You're Reaper 3 now, whether you like it or not. The pilot who came when no one else could." The 72-hour deadline arrived. Kara was summoned back to the conference room, where the same 4 generals waited. But this time, their expressions were different. Not hostile, not cold, but something approaching respect. General Holbrook spoke first. "Major Jensen, we've completed our review. The original investigation into your squadron's loss has been reopened, and new evidence has come to light. Radio recordings, satellite data, timeline analysis, everything we should have examined more carefully 3 years ago." She paused, and Kara's heart hammered. "The findings are clear. You did not abandon your squadron. You were not negligent. You did everything humanly possible to reach them, but the distance and timing made it impossible. The fault was not yours. It was simply the tragic mathematics of war." Kara felt tears threatening but held them back. "Sir, your grounding was based on faulty assumptions and, frankly, scapegoating," General Stone added. "Someone had to be blamed for the loss, and you were the convenient target because you survived. That was wrong. We were wrong." General Hart leaned forward. "Major Jensen, Effective immediately, your grounding is lifted. You are fully reinstated to flight status. Furthermore, you're being recommended for the Distinguished Flying Cross for your actions in saving 210 Marines under combat conditions. The room swam. Slightly. Reinstated. Cleared. Vindicated. Weight she'd carried for 3 years began to crumble. Thank you, sir. Don't thank us, Holbrook said. Thank the Marines who refused to let your sacrifice go unrecognized. Thank the truth that finally came out. And maybe thank yourself for proving that you never stopped being the pilot your squadron believed you were. That evening, Kara stood outside the base gates and met the Marines who'd waited for 3 days. They cheered when they saw her, pressed forward to shake her hand, to thank her, to tell her what her actions meant. One young corporal, barely 20 years old, had tears streaming down his face. "I'm going home, ma'am," he said. "I'm seeing my family because of you. My little sister gets her big brother back. How do I ever thank you for that?" Kara's voice broke. "You just did, Corporal. You just did." Walking back through the base that night, past the hangar where 1138 sat damaged but not destroyed, Kara felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Not complete, never complete, but genuine. She'd saved them. She'd been cleared. She'd been given her wings back. The ghost in the hangar was gone. In her place stood Reaper 3, ready to fly again. The ceremony was scheduled for 2 weeks later. Time enough for the Air Force to prepare something appropriately formal and for key personnel to arrive. Kara spent those weeks in a strange limbo, cleared to fly, but without an official assignment, famous but uncertain what that fame meant for her future. She returned to the simulator bay, not as an instructor this time, but to maintain her proficiency, running combat scenarios that felt hollow compared to the real thing. Lieutenant Webb found her there one afternoon, running her 5th consecutive close air support simulation. He waited until she'd finished before speaking. "Major, you know you don't have to prove anything anymore, right? You saved 210 Marines. That's proof enough." "I'm not proving anything to anyone else," Kara said, climbing out of the simulator. "I'm proving it to myself. Making sure I can still do it, that today wasn't a fluke. 5 perfect runs isn't a fluke, ma'am. It's skill." Webb hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead. How do you live with it? The 3 years of being grounded, of everyone thinking you failed. How'd you not give up?" Kara considered the question carefully. "I almost did give up, honestly. Every day was a choice between showing up or walking away. I showed up because even if I couldn't fly combat, I could teach others. Could make sure the next generation didn't make mistakes, didn't face what I faced. Purpose doesn't always look like we expect it to." Webb nodded slowly. "My dad was a pilot. Got grounded after a crash that wasn't his fault. He gave up, left the Air Force, spent the rest of his life bitter. I always wondered if he could have found the way back, like you did. Some paths lead back, some don't. I got lucky, had the right combination of circumstance and desperation." Kara smiled slightly. "And Marines who needed saving. That helped." The Distinguished Flying Cross ceremony was held at the main parade ground, attended by generals, politicians, media, and over 300 Marines. Every member of the 2 companies she'd saved had requested leave to attend. The Secretary of the Air Force himself flew in to present the medal, along with several members of Congress who wanted to be associated with the feel-good story. Kara stood at attention in her dress uniform, medals she'd earned over years of service gleaming on her chest, about to receive the highest honor of her career. But her eyes kept drifting to the Marines in the audience. Young faces that would age now, have families, live lives that almost ended in the desert. Secretary William Harrison's speech was eloquent, talking about courage and determination, and the finest traditions of military service. But what stuck with Kara was simpler. Major Jensen demonstrated that sometimes the rulebook matters less than the mission. That saving lives is the highest calling of military service. That one pilot in an obsolete aircraft can change the outcome of an entire battle. When he pinned the medal to her uniform, the applause was thunderous. The Marines stood as one, cheering, some with tears on their faces. Kara maintained her composure through the ceremony, through the receiving line, through the dozens of handshakes and thank yous. But afterward, alone in her quarters, she held the medal and wept for the squadron she'd lost, for the Marines she'd saved, for the 3 years of guilt that had finally begun to ease. Captain Helen Reeves found her there an hour later. "Hey, you okay?" "Yeah." Kara wiped her eyes. Just processing. "It's a lot." "It is." Helen sat beside her. "But you earned it. Not just today's mission, but every day you showed up for 3 years when you had every reason to quit. That's courage, too." The following week brought an unexpected visitor. Colonel Richard Whitman, the officer who'd coordinated the rescue operation. He requested a meeting in Kara's office. She now had an office, part of her reinstatement. She'd spent the morning trying to figure out what to do with it. Major Jensen. Whitman closed the door behind him. "I owe you an apology." Kara blinked. "Sir?" 3 years ago, I was part of the review board that grounded you. We examined the evidence, heard the testimony, and concluded that you were emotionally compromised. That your survival when your squadron died indicated either cowardice or poor judgment. He looked pained. "We were wrong. Completely, catastrophically wrong. You were doing your job, sir. Making the call you thought was right." "No." Whitman's voice was firm. "We were taking the easy path. Blaming you was simpler than accepting that sometimes good people die despite everyone's best efforts. We needed someone to hold responsible, and you were there, carrying your own guilt, making it easy for us to pile ours on top." He pulled a folder from his briefcase. "I've been reviewing the original investigation. The radio transcripts, the timeline, the tactical situation. You were 40 miles out when the ambush hit. Even at maximum speed, you couldn't have reached them in under 3 minutes. By the time you arrived, they'd been dead for at least 90 seconds. Nothing you could have done differently would have changed that." Kara felt her chest constrict. "I know that now, sir. But knowing and accepting are different." "They are. But I want you to truly understand. What happened to your squadron was not your fault. The enemy was faster, better positioned, and luckier than we were. That's war. That's the brutal mathematics of combat. You survived because you were farther out, not because you abandoned them. Then why did everyone believe I had?" Whitman sighed heavily. "Because guilt is contagious. Your guilt made others uncomfortable, so they created a narrative that justified it. If you'd failed, then there was a reason for the tragedy. If you hadn't failed, then it was just random chance, and random chance terrifies people. They'd rather believe in your failure than accept that sometimes we do everything right and still lose." The words settled over Kara like a blanket, warm and uncomfortable and necessary. 3 years of self-blame. 3 years of carrying responsibility that was never truly hers. "I wish someone had told me this 3 years ago." "So do I. It would have saved you a lot of pain." "But maybe." Whitman hesitated. "Maybe you needed to prove it to yourself first. Needed to fly that mission. Save those Marines. Demonstrate that you still had what it takes. Sometimes validation from others doesn't work until we validate ourselves." After Whitman left, Kara sat alone in her office, processing. The old guilt was still there. It would always be there, but it felt different now. Not a crushing weight, but a memorial, a reminder to honor those lost by living fully, by flying skillfully, By never giving up on the people who counted on her. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Major Jensen, this is Sergeant David Martinez. You saved my life in Al Hatter. My daughter was born yesterday. We named her Kara. Thank you for giving me the chance to be a father. Attached was a photo of a tiny newborn, pink and perfect, wrapped in a hospital blanket. Kara stared at the image, at this new life that existed because of one morning's decision, and felt something shift inside her. This was legacy. This was purpose. Not medals or ceremonies, but lives lived and families started and futures created. She texted back, "Congratulations, Sergeant. Make her proud." The response came quickly. "I will. By living the way you flew, never giving up, always showing up. Doing what's right, even when it's hard." That evening, Kara visited Hangar 7 for the first time since the mission. The damaged A-10-1138 sat where the recovery crew had placed it, scarred and broken but somehow dignified. Tom Braddock was there, as she'd known he would be, running his hands over the battered airframe. "She's done," he said without preamble. "Too much damage to repair economically. They're retiring her officially. Museum-bound, probably the Smithsonian. She earned it." Kara touched the fuselage gently. "Saved my life, saved 210 Marines. Not bad for an obsolete aircraft everyone said should be scrapped. You know what the techs found when they examined the damage?" Braddock pulled out a report. "The missile that hit you should have destroyed the entire aircraft. Should have ignited the fuel tanks, killed you instantly. But the angle of impact, the way the airframe absorbed the shock, the fact that your emergency bank put you in exactly the right position, the odds of surviving that hit were maybe 1 in 100. Lucky and skilled. You knew exactly how to position the aircraft to minimize damage. Muscle memory, training, instinct, whatever you want to call it. You didn't just survive, Kara. You flew that bird like you and she were one thing. Like you knew every rivet, every weakness, every strength." Kara looked at the A-10, seeing it differently now. Not just a machine, but a partner, a fellow warrior that had refused to quit even when dying. "We were both grounded too early," she said quietly. "Both told we were finished. Guess we proved them wrong. That you did." Braddock handed her something, a small piece of metal, polished and engraved. "Maintenance crew wanted you to have this. It's from the starboard engine cowling, the side that took the missile hit. The metal was scarred but smooth, engraved with simple words, Reaper 3 and 1138. Never too late. Kara closed her fingers around it, feeling the weight of memory and meaning. "Thank you, Tom, for everything. For keeping her ready, for believing she still had a mission left in her." "I believed in both of you," Braddock said gruffly. "Always did. Sometimes believing is enough to make things true." Walking back across the base that night, Kara felt the pieces of her life settling into a new configuration. Not the same as before. She'd never be that pilot again. But something better, maybe. Something tempered by loss and forged by determination. Something that understood the weight of responsibility and the power of showing up. The ghost was gone. Reaper 3 remained. And somewhere in the difference between those two identities was the person Kara Jensen was becoming, scarred, determined, and finally at peace with the pilot in the mirror. The reassignment orders came 3 weeks after the ceremony. Kara was sitting in her office, working through pilot evaluations she'd been temporarily assigned to review, training protocols while the Air Force decided what to do with their suddenly famous officer when the encrypted email arrived. She read it twice, certain she'd misunderstood. "Major Kara Jensen is hereby assigned as commanding officer. Reaper Squadron, reconstituted, effective immediately. Report to Nellis Air Force Base for duty assignment and squadron activation. Reaper Squadron." Her old unit, the one that had died 3 years ago, was being brought back. and they were giving it to her dad. She called Colonel Whitman, who answered on the first ring. "I'm guessing you got the orders?" "Sir, I don't understand." "Reaper Squadron was deactivated." "Why reconstitute it now?" "Because the Air Force learned something from your mission. Close air support matters. Attends matter. Having pilots who'll fly into hell to save troops matters." Whitman's voice carried a note of satisfaction. Command decided that if one grounded pilot in an obsolete aircraft could save 210 Marines, imagine what a full squadron of dedicated CAS pilots could do. "But they're giving command to me? After everything?" "Specifically because of everything. You understand the cost of failure and the meaning of success. You've proven you'll do whatever's necessary to bring people home. That's exactly the kind of officer we need leading this squadron." Kara stared at the orders, hands trembling slightly. "Who'll be flying with me?" "That's your call. You'll have first pick of pilots from across the Air Force. Choose your team, train them your way. Build Reaper Squadron into what you think it should be." Whitman paused. "One condition. You take Lieutenant Webb as your executive officer. He's young, but he's sharp, and he believes in you. Every CO needs someone like that." "Yes, sir." "When do I leave?" "Transport leaves tomorrow at 0800. Pack your bags, Major. You're going home." Home. The word resonated strangely. She'd thought of Maxwell as exile, a place she'd been sent to fade away. But Nellis, or Reaper Squadron, had been based, where she'd flown her best missions and lost her dearest friends. That was home. Returning there would be painful and necessary in equal measure. Captain Helen Reeves helped her pack that evening, mostly by sitting on the bed and providing commentary. "You're leaving me," she said with mock sadness. "Abandoning me to paperwork and administrative purgatory. Come with me." The word surprised Kara as much as Helen. "Not to fly, I know you can't. But squadron operations officer. Someone needs to keep us organized, and you're the most organized person I know." Helen's expression shifted from surprise to consideration. "You're serious." "Completely. I need people I trust, Helen. People who understand what it means to get knocked down and keep fighting." "That's you." "I'd have to put in for transfer, get medical clearance for the position. Do it, please. I need you there." Helen smiled, the first genuine smile Kara had seen from her in months. "Okay, yeah, let's do this. Let's build something good." Nellis Air Force Base was exactly as Kara remembered: sprawling, busy, purposeful. The home of the Air Force's advanced training programs, where pilots learned to be better, faster, deadlier. And now, home to Reaper Squadron again. The hangar they'd been assigned was at the edge of the flight line. 10 aircraft bays and administrative spaces for 50 personnel. Currently, it was empty except for Lieutenant Marcus Webb, who'd arrived a day early to prepare. He saluted when Kara entered. "Welcome home, Major. Or should I say, welcome to the beginning." "Beginning works." Kara looked around the empty hangar, seeing not what was but what could be. "How many pilot applications do we have?" 87 and counting. Word spread fast that you're building a squadron. Everyone wants to fly with Reaper 3. We're not choosing based on who wants to fly with me. We're choosing based on who's best for the mission." Kara pulled up the applications on her tablet, started scrolling through names and records. Experienced pilots, young pilots, pilots from fighters and bombers and transports, all wanting to be part of something they saw as meaningful. She stopped on one application. Read it carefully. Lieutenant Rachel Morrison, 26 years old, former F-16 pilot, grounded after a crash that left her with permanent hearing loss in her left ear. Medical discharge pending. Webb, contact Lieutenant Morrison. Tell her the grounding doesn't matter for this squadron. We're not looking for perfect pilots. We're looking for determined ones. Over the next 2 weeks, Kara built her team. Pilots who'd been overlooked, passed over, or pushed aside. Captain Eric Sullivan, brilliant tactician with a stutter that made other commanders dismiss him. Lieutenant Angela Torres, single mother who'd been told she couldn't balance family and military service. Captain David Kim, older pilot who'd been considered too cautious, too unwilling to take risks. All of them had been told they weren't quite good enough. All of them had something to prove. This is your squadron? An Air Force colonel visiting the base stopped by during the second week, watching Kara's new pilots run formation drills. Major, no offense, but this looks like a collection of misfits and washouts. That's exactly what it is, sir. Kara didn't look away from her pilots. Every person here knows what it feels like to be dismissed, to be told they're not good enough. That makes them hungry, motivated, and absolutely committed to proving everyone wrong. The colonel shook his head. You're building a squadron based on chip-on-shoulder mentality. That's not how elite units work. With respect, sir, I'm building a squadron based on determination and second chances. Every pilot here knows the cost of failure and the value of opportunity. They won't waste either. She proved it 3 weeks later during their first major exercise. Reaper Squadron was tasked with providing close air support for a simulated marine company under attack. The scenario was deliberately difficult: poor weather, limited visibility, fast-moving targets, and strict rules of engagement. Most squadrons took 30 to 45 minutes to successfully complete the exercise. Kara's pilots did it in 18. They flew with precision born of desperation, coordinated like they'd been together for years instead of weeks, and demonstrated exactly the kind of aggressive competence that made close air support effective. The exercise controllers were stunned. The Marines playing the ground forces were impressed, and Kara felt a surge of pride that took her breath away. "How do you do that?" the Marine colonel running the exercise asked afterward. "That was some of the finest CA's flying I've seen outside of actual combat. We remember what it's like to need help and not get it in time," Kara said simply. "So we make sure we're always in time." That evening, Kara gathered her squadron in the briefing room. 16 pilots, all watching her with a mixture of respect and curiosity. She stood at the front, feeling the weight of command and the lightness of purpose. "You know why you're here," she began. "You're here because someone somewhere decided you weren't good enough, that you had flaws that disqualified you from elite service. They were wrong. You're here because I believe in second chances, because I know that being knocked down doesn't mean staying down." She pulled out the old squadron patch, the one she'd carried for 3 years, burned and stitched back together. This was Reaper Squadron's motto: never too late. It means that as long as we're airborne, as long as we have ammunition, as long as Marines are counting on us, we don't give up. We don't quit. We never decide it's too late to make a difference. This squadron exists for one purpose: saving lives. We fly when others can't. We fight when others won't. We bring troops home alive. That's not just our mission. It's our promise. To every Marine, every soldier, every person on the ground who needs us. Captain Sullivan, the tactical officer with the stutter, spoke up. "Ma'am, what if we fail? What if we're not fast enough or good enough? Then we learn from it and do better next time," Kara said honestly. "Failure happens. It's part of combat, part of life. But we don't let failure define us. We let our response to failure define us. You get knocked down. You get back up. You make a mistake. You learn from it. You lose someone. You honor them by continuing the mission." She looked at each pilot in turn. "I lost my entire squadron 3 years ago. Carried that guilt. Let it ground me. Let it convince me I was finished. Then, 210 Marines needed help, and I had to choose. Stay grounded or fly anyway. I chose to fly, and it changed everything. You're all here because you made similar choices. Chose to keep fighting when quitting would have been easier. chose to believe in yourselves when others didn't. That's the foundation of this squadron. Not perfection, but determination. Not flawlessness, but grit. Lieutenant Morrison, the pilot with hearing loss, raised her hand. Major, what do you need from us? Everything. Your skill, your courage, your commitment. But most importantly, I need you to show up. Every day, every mission, every time someone calls for help. Show up and give everything you have. That's all I ask. The squadron stood as one, and Kara felt something click into place. This wasn't just a collection of pilots. This was a team, a family, built on shared understanding of what it meant to fall and rise again. Reaper Squadron was back. And this time, with scars that made them stronger and determination that made them unstoppable. They were ready to prove that second chances weren't just possible, they were powerful. 6 months after Reaper Squadron's reconstitution, they received their first real combat deployment. Kara stood on the flight line at dawn, watching her pilots conduct pre-flight checks on their A-10s, and felt the familiar mix of pride and anxiety that came with sending people into danger. The mission was straightforward: provide close air support for Marine operations in a contested region. Exactly what they trained for. Exactly what Reaper Squadron was built to do. Ready, Major? Lieutenant Webb appeared beside her, his own flight suit on, helmet under his arm. He'd become an excellent executive officer and a skilled pilot. The kind of second-in-command every CO needed. As ready as we'll ever be. Kara pulled on her own helmet, felt it settle into place like an old friend. Remember the mission brief. Stay coordinated, watch each other's backs, and bring everyone home. Never too late, Webb said, touching the squadron patch on his shoulder. Never too late, Kara agreed. The deployment lasted 4 months. Reaper Squadron flew 237 missions, supported 18 different Marine units, and didn't lose a single pilot. They became legendary among the ground forces, the squadron that always answered the call, always arrived on time, always brought the kind of precise violence that turned battles. Marines started requesting them by name, wanted Reaper Squadron overhead when things got dangerous. One mission stood out. A Marine patrol got ambushed 30 miles behind enemy lines, pinned down with multiple casualties and no immediate support available. The weather was terrible: thunderstorms, zero visibility, the kind of conditions that grounded most aircraft. Kara led a 4-ship flight into the storm, navigated by instruments and instinct, and arrived over the Marines exactly when promised. The gun runs were conducted in near-zero visibility, guided by Marine ground controllers and Kara's absolute trust in her training. They broke the ambush, suppressed the enemy, and held position until extraction helicopters could reach the patrol. Afterward, the Marine Company commander sent a message that Kara had framed in the squadron operations. Center, to Reaper Squadron. You flew through hell to reach us. Every Marine here is alive because you came when no one else could. You're not just pilots. You're guardian angels in ugly planes. Semper Fi. When the deployment ended and Reaper Squadron returned to Nellis, they were different. Scarred by combat, yes, but stronger for it. They'd proven what Kara had always believed, that determination mattered more than perfection, that showing up was half the battle, and that second chances could lead to first-rate performance. The Air Force recognized it too. Reaper Squadron received the Gallant Unit Citation, one of the highest honors for squadron-level achievement. More importantly, the A-10 program was renewed, given new funding and respect. Close air support was recognized as essential, not obsolete. The ugly, ungainly Warthog would keep flying, keep saving lives, because one grounded pilot had proven its worth when everyone else had given up on it. 5 years after her unauthorized mission to save 210 Marines, Kara was promoted to lieutenant colonel and given command of an entire close air support wing. 3 squadrons, 48 aircraft, over 200 personnel. She stood at the change of command ceremony, preparing to give her speech, and looked out at the assembled officers and pilots. Some she knew well, others were strangers. But all of them understood the mission. Save lives, answer the call, never quit. When I was grounded 5 years ago, Kara began, I thought my flying days were over. Thought that surviving when my squadron died meant I didn't deserve to fly anymore. I was wrong. Being knocked down doesn't mean staying down. Failure doesn't define you unless you let it. This wing exists because of Marines who needed help, because of an obsolete aircraft that refused to quit, and because of second chances. We're not the prettiest planes or the fastest pilots, but we're the ones who show up. We're the ones who fly when others can't, who fight when others won't, who bring people home when no one else can. She pulled out the old patch, the one she still carried, now mounted in a frame. Never too late. That's not just a motto, it's a promise. A promise to every person on the ground who needs us, to every life we're trusted to protect. As long as we're airborne, it's never too late to make a difference. After the ceremony, a group of young pilots approached her. Fresh from training, eager and nervous, about to begin their first assignments. One of them, a woman who couldn't have been more than 23, spoke for the group. Ma'am, we all chose close air support because of you. Because you showed us that this matters, that saving lives is the highest calling. We want to be like you. Kara looked at their young, hopeful faces and remembered herself at that age. Before the losses, before the guilt, before the long journey back to purpose. Then remember this, she said gently. You will make mistakes. You will face situations where you can't save everyone. You will carry guilt and doubt. That's part of this job. But mistakes don't mean failure. Guilt doesn't mean unworthiness. What matters is what you do after. Do you give up, or do you keep flying? Do you quit, or do you show up the next day ready to try again? That's the choice that defines you. And know this, you're never alone. When you're struggling, when you're doubting yourself, remember that others have been there. I've been there. Your squadron mates have been there. We're all broken in some way, all carrying scars. That doesn't make us weak. It makes us human. And human beings, determined ones, can accomplish extraordinary things. That evening, Kara visited the National Museum of the United States Air Force, where a 10-1138 was now permanently displayed. The aircraft looked strange in the museum setting, cleaned up and spotlit, surrounded by gleaming fighters and historic bombers. But the scars were still visible, the battle damage carefully preserved. A reminder of what it had endured and survived. The plaque beside it told the story. Major Kara Jensen, Reaper 3, flying this damaged aircraft to save 210 Marines. But it didn't tell the whole story. It couldn't capture the 3 years of guilt, the long journey back to purpose, the moment of decision that changed everything.